Yeah,
Giles,
hi Richard. Richard, how are you?
I'm well. Lovely to hear you, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
So I'll leave you to upload your presentation. We're looking forward to this one in particular. Just while you're doing that, Giles was with us. You did a first degree here as well, didn't you?
I did, yeah, I did
Yeah.
rural land management, and then I did your natural resource management course.
That's right. So this is one of the earlier programs, so undergraduate, postgraduate. Giles was into there. Giles, I just want to reflect on the fact. Remember, we had the conversation on the IRD and Friends about your soybean at high altitude.
Yes,
Did you
yes, we
ever
have.
sort that one out?
No, we haven't. We can't. We've probably trialed 300 or 400 different varieties of soya
Yeah,
now. And we struggle when we're not quite. We think it's the high altitude, but also added to the light towers. Obviously, we're in Kenya on the equator,
yeah.
and the plants don't seem to get the signal to start fruiting.
I'm with you, yeah, because they're getting a continuous one. The reason I mention that is that just to tell the audience is that a lot of I think nearly 200 of the ex-master students are on a group on Messenger, and Giles posed this question, and we had a conversation globally about how to solve that, including getting Roberto in Embrapa to say, well, a friend down in Argentina might be able to help with this. So this idea about sharing information to a group of like-minded people is working well informally with the Masters alumni, but we're hoping that we can create the same sort of thing with members becoming members of TAAI and therefore having a truly global ability to discuss things. But that's just a side point. Giles is going to really talk about, from a regenerative agriculture point of view, a slightly different perspective, and that is where you have actually seen regenerative agriculture working at larger scale. How do you get it to small scale? How do you reduce it down in size? And that's what I think we're hoping. I'm hoping that Agventure and Giles will talk about. So Giles, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. Hello everyone. I am Giles. I'm the Chief Operations Officer of a company called Agventure Limited here in Kenya. We basically a large scale or a group of large scale farms that all do sustainable farming or conservation agriculture or regen ag, whatever the latest word is for it. And what we're looking to do is to add value to broadacre non-irrigated farms and farmers in Kenya specifically by enabling conservation agriculture to improve farm resilience and long-term sustainability. This is really sustainability for large-scale farming, and it's predominantly, sorry, I've jumped ahead by one, predominantly through grains, which was always our staple, the staple food in East Africa, and that's what was always traditionally grown on these farms. They were all basically growing wheat, maize, or barley. And we were very lucky in this region in that all of our crops, all of those crops, we're net importers of them all. So we have a parity pricing, which in essence is the world price plus the shipping price to get to our region, plus the transport and the importation costs. So farmers got away with it for a long time, just monocropping. That isn't working anymore, and we're trying to work out how do we move on from that. So Agventure was formed in 2010. So sorry, let me just explain what I'm going to talk about. First of all, I'll tell you who we are. I'll show you what we're doing in the field, and then how we're trying to bring in the small scale or medium scale farmers to that. Agventure was started in 2010 by a group of farmers who went to Australia. They struggled to understand how Australian farmers were able to produce far better crops than we were on a quarter of the rainfall. The Australian farmers were able to produce a fantastic crop on, let's say, 300 millimeters of rainfall, whereas we had farms on 800 to 1,200 mils, which were lagging behind. They learned a few things there. One was about conservation agriculture and the pillars behind that, which I'll talk about later. But also the second thing they took away was to set up a farmers group or a cooperative that works together. So we are 15,000 hectares in total between our shareholder farms, and we're working with small and medium scale farmers about 8,000 hectares, and we have trained about 3,500 farmers in using the same principles that we're using. We trade about 45,000 tons of crop a year. All this is grown in Kenya, and we're trying to value add to every single crop that we process. That's not always possible, but that's what we're trying to do. So we have several wings from agronomy, and we actually have an ex-siren agronomist. We have a second one about to join us. We train farmers in conservation agriculture. They're not part of the group. We trade for about $7 million worth of inputs a year. We're trading several crops, which are listed below, between maize, wheat, barley, sorghum, rye, oats. We're trying to add value to the canola, sunflower, and linseed at the moment, and then we're also trying to add value to the pulses, including peas, beans, lupins, chickpeas, and green grams. So we've got a very diverse amount of crops that we're dealing with. And we're also, and which is really exciting for us, moving into seed breeding. We have an in-house seed breeder from KWS, which is very confusing for people in Kenya because it also means the Kenyan Wildlife Service. But KWS is the third largest seed company in the world. It's the largest privately owned seed company. We've just had their CEO and COO out here this morning, and we're just looking at how to build our relationship with them. We've also got a retail wing, so we have all of our canola oil, and honeys and pulses in supermarkets and in our own shops. And we're just basically trying to solve a lot of problems that our farmers traditionally had, and we're trying to do everything for them that allows them to concentrate on the stuff that they're good at, which is really the farming. So Agventure, I've discussed most of this already, but that's basically how the company is split up. We do a lot of, we have the Center of Excellence, which is our outgrow program, and our CSR. We have the KWS relationship. We have the seed production. We do a lot of trialing. I think last year we had 17 trials around the country from 1,200 meters in altitude up to 3,000 meters. We have a bee project, which I wish I could have listened more to the previous discussion, but it's an interesting one for us. Bees are so important as pollinators, and we really try and look after them. And we have 4 different honeys that we sell in retail. We do a lot of trading between inputs, logistics. We're looking at a large storage program where we're going to be putting in storage in one of our regions. And we are processing several crops, and obviously have the retail and the administration. So why are we better together? Well, we can better generation of knowledge. A key thing for us is sharing information. All of our farmers are so knowledgeable, but we really want everyone to share what they've learned, what's going well, what's going badly. And we now try and push that down to our Center of Excellence, to our outgrowers as well. We have quite a high purchase power on inputs. We are the 3rd or 4th largest customer for companies like Bayer and Syngenta in the region. And we have quite large economies of scale when we're selling. As an example, we're probably growing between 40 and 50% of the barley grown for East African breweries every year. And we're probably growing about 15 to 20% of Kenya's wheat. We obviously have efficiencies by working together, and we are able as a group to invest in new factories and increase knowledge through our trialing and in machinery. Sharing information is really key, as I said earlier. We do a lot of trialing, which you see in the top right-hand side there. We have these quite large trial sites. And it's giving us a lot of data on varieties, crop protection, spacing. It's quite interesting. And we've now working with CIMMYT in that we take 100 varieties from them straight out of Mexico. We grow them in trial sites here in Kenya in 3 different sites. And then we give them back the data, and it also gives us early access to those varieties that we can then decide which ones we want to bulk up and take to market. The bottom right-hand side shows a graph showing some of the trialing data. This is on DAP, diammonium phosphate. And from the data in this trial specifically, we found that by adding a peat booster to the DAP, we were able to cut usage by 15% on our farms, which last year saved us about $300,000 over the farming group. So the data we generate from the trialing is really, really important to us. We also are able to build relationships. I talked about the relationship with Simit in the bottom left-hand corner there. You can see the Simit team out on one of our trial blocks. And we can really try and sell our crops together commercially through retail or through bulk. In the field, we're able to produce more efficiently. Farmers are now much more resilient to climate change. We can produce more, and we're proving far better soil health. The soil is basically, by letting the soil work by itself and without breaking it every year as the plowing it does, or by tilling it, it allows that soil to just build a fantastic structure. And it's a lot more resilient. It holds water a lot better. And I'll discuss all of this as we move on. And it also allows our plants to go deeper into the soil and to draw nutrients from below, which they never could have done previously. And again, I've discussed diversification of farm produce, value addition. We also make a canola cake, which is one of the byproducts from one of our factories, and it's a fantastic protein source, which is very important in a country like Kenya that's very, very protein poor. So again, we are farming practice, and this is not in theory. I had someone the other day who said to me, "Does sustainable farming, has it ever worked anywhere in the world?" And I said, "Well, just come around the farms with me, and I'll show you, because it's incredible what's actually happening in the fields." If I take you back a stage, so this is going back to historically, and this graph shows two things. One is what the actual yield in Kenya was, which is on barley on the blue line, and the orange was the potential yield at the same time. So by monocropping, we were decreasing soil health, and we were really increasing pest and disease damage, and we weren't moving in the right direction at all. So what is conservation agriculture as far as we see it? Well, its key is sharing knowledge, rotational crops, reducing tillage and controlled traffic, getting better varieties, using much better techniques, and then stronger market linkages to enable rotational crops and diversification. We had to create a lot of these value chains because they simply were not here. For example, with canola, when we first started growing it, the market price was 16 shillings a kilo. By putting our own factories in place, we're now able to pay the farmers. Well, last year we were 83 Kenyan shillings a kilo. So that's been a great win for us. Without those sorts of prices, it would be impossible for them to grow it. So if I take you, first of all, to rotational cropping, these two photographs are taken from the same field, meters apart from each other. The picture on the left is a cereal after a cereal, and the picture on the right is a cereal after sunflowers. I mean, it's quite clear that the rotational cropping is a huge benefit. I talked to you briefly about controlled traffic. So in a field where machinery is allowed to run riot and to move freely, for example, with plowing, with tilling of any sort, you end up with a huge amount of compaction over the whole field. Whereas with what we do, and this is not an ideal diagram, but it sort of shows you what we're trying to do, we try and stick to the same tram lines every time. All of our machinery is set up in multiples of 9. So it'll be 9 meters, 18 meters, or 27 meters. So, for example, the combine harvester will be at 9 meters, the sprayer may be at 27 meters, the planter might be at 9. And we stay on the same tram lines every single time. All wheel spacings are at 4 meters. So we're only compacting a tiny, tiny amount of that field, which leaves 95% of the field just free without any compaction at all. If I now move on to minimal or zero till, so we plant directly into the previous stubble crop, and that stubble actually helps to protect the upcoming crops. This photograph is sunflowers planted into wheat. This is a photograph from 2 days ago, I think. You can see some nice blue skies, dark skies in the background, which is El Nino hopefully coming in our direction. And the only problem with this is because we are retaining that stubble, there's disease carryover if we use the same family of crops. So we can't really use a grass on a grass. We have to then change to a pulse or a legume or a brassica of some sort in the next season. This basically shows that the picture on the left-hand side shows traditionally what's happened to our soils, and we have that huge plow pan. The seeds or the roots were not very healthy. They were sick. They weren't reaching deep down into below the pan. Whereas now, by using different crops like sunflowers, we can break through that pan, and the roots can then follow down those biopores. We now have wheat roots going down to about 2 meters, which is really, really exciting. And this just shows you in the field, the roots on the left-hand side are short and stunted. They're not going very far, whereas you see the roots on the right-hand side just keep on going. This is, again, a picture from 2 fields very close to each other. One farmed under conventional farming and the other under our systems. They both had similar rainfall and they're both at similar gradients. Obviously, the one on the left has lost a lot of seed. It's lost a lot of topsoil, whereas the farm on the right hand side, the field on the right hand side, that water is absorbed into the soil and it's kept there for the crop. We really don't see the runoff. Where I'm sitting now, our next door neighbors used to fill their dams off this farm. Sadly, they've had to change their whole farming system because our farms no longer have runoff. All of the water is absorbed into our own soil, so they can no longer fill their dams from our fields. Now, does it work? So I'm going to take you through a few case studies. This is a farm called Aldoño, again, farmed by our next Rural Ag College in those days student. And it shows basically, I don't know if you can see my mouse on the screen. But it shows what traditionally used to happen. And he moved into a rotational cropping or conservation agriculture system in about 2011, about this period here. Traditionally, his cereals average was less than 3 ton a hectare. And then what we're seeing over time is that cumulative average for cereals is rising and rising and rising over the years as he moves longer and longer into the system. So you can even see for example, in this season here in September 2009, he had a total crop failure on his wheat. That was a very, very bad year. He's had similar years here in 2017 and 2019. Similar rainfall. He would traditionally have had a total crop failure there, but you can actually see that his wheat in those years is yielding higher than his previous average. This is another farm called Marania. This is probably our most high potential farm. And this, again, shows a similar pattern of the cereal average rising from about 5 ton a hectare up to 7 ton a hectare by putting in these rotational crops and by using the whole system. Now, where this really becomes interesting is if we're looking at rainfall at the same time. So what this graph shows is the rainfall in this dotted sort of line here. And then this dark blue line shows the cereal yield in kilograms per hectare per millimeter of rainfall. And what we're seeing is that this farm is becoming a lot more resilient, especially in the bad years. They're producing a significant yield, and the actual amount of kilos produced per millimeter of rainfall has increased from here, where it was at about 10, up to about 20, 23, where it is now. So we're producing more with the rainfall that we have. Going further, we can show this pillar on the left-hand side is Uasin Gishu, which is the highest yielding maize area in Kenya. And what this shows, they have a huge amount of rainfall, 1,200 millimeters, but they don't produce much with that. It shows with the farms going from this point onwards are all our farms. And even though the rainfall isn't as high as that farm, we're producing more and more with the rainfall that we're getting to Marania, which is this farm that I just showed you. And Maranya actually, in a drought year 2 years ago, unofficially broke the spring barley record with 11.56 tons of barley per hectare. Again, in a drought year. So this brings me on to our Center of Excellence, which is our sort of outgrower program, and what we're doing with the smaller medium scale farmers. So this is an extension service that we have. We have I think it's about 7 or 8 agronomists out in the field in all of the major wheat growing areas. They are teaching farmers to try and farm the same way as we are. We made a decision to try to start this with rotational cropping. And by the end of 2022, we trained 3,216 farmers, and they had produced 46% of our volume for the Nakuru factory, at least. What do? We create awareness of conservation agriculture. We promote crop rotation as a key pillar of sustainable farming. We try and support these farmers throughout the growing process, so we're always there to show them what to do. All of these farmers have been monocropping, and their fathers have been monocropping, their grandparents were monocropping. So it's quite a shock change trying to get them to change. And as I said, we're present in all of the main wheat growing regions. Where are we? You can see over the years, our area under production is rising. The harvest tonnage was rising. Unfortunately, in 2022, we had a pretty significant drought, which really hit the average yield that we were getting from them. And that's been a hangover into this year. But we're really pushing. I should think by the end of this year, we'll be at 600 to 700 kilos per acre from our outgrow program, which is really exciting. But where do we want to be? We'll want to be at over a ton an acre. We're trying to give the farmers affordable access to machinery, access to quality inputs through our economies of scale. We can get great deals on chemicals, so we try and pass that on to these outgrowers as much as possible. We want to see farmers increasing their acreage. We're trying to give them risk management through insurance, through a third party. And we want to be recognized as a key partner for them. And really, once we find farmers who are successful, we open up a lot of the other crops that we're growing, a lot of the other varieties that we're growing, just to try and help them on their journey with the systems that we're using. So if I bring it back to what are the problems that they're facing, these are the 9 things that I really look at and how we try and solve them. So obviously, everyone says, oh, it's drought. We've had huge weather problems, no rain. Well, we're harvesting at the moment a crop of about 2.5 ton of wheat off a farm that had 36 millimeters of rainfall in crop. So weather's clearly not the problem if we're using the right technologies. They don't have a market, so we've solved that for them by giving them a market for these seeds. We also try and register the seeds for them with KEFIS, and we give them that. And we give them as much knowledge and support. Again, I've spoken about the inputs. We try and help them with that. We can't help them with machinery, but we try and source contractors who can. We are fighting for them with the banks. Credit is amazingly expensive in Kenya. And unfortunately, there's always setup charges, which once you add that to the interest charges, just make it untenable. So we're working hard on that. By fixing all of the above, we hope that this will solve the yield problem. And then with the post-harvest losses, we've put in cleaners and dryers so farmers can hand over seed to us in pretty poor conditions, and we can solve it for them certainly on the canola side anyway. We basically try and offer them an ecosystem of services, and we can't do all of this, so a lot of this is outsourced, so we try and point them in the right directions. We're totally independent, so we're just trying to give them the best advice that we can, and who to speak to. So we just mostly give them advice on this. We use a lot of the trial data that we have in our trialing system, and we try and do a lot of visits with these farmers. We take them to our trial sites, show them what we're doing, how we do it, and we're quite open with all of that. They are very, very thirsty for knowledge. Unfortunately, in 2010, there was a change in the Kenyan constitution, which was devolution. And the problem with that is that it devolved a lot of these agricultural services down to the county from the national government. Now, since then, all of the outreach has completely died. So there's no one there trying to help these farmers from the government and advising them. They are really thirsty for knowledge. We give them as much information we can, and we have to be careful how we give that to them so that it's powerful and they take it away in a positive way. Again, what is the most effective way to get them information? We've tried videos, we've tried pieces of paper. We think those don't really work. We're playing with this all the time. How do we pass on our message most effectively? Again, we're on social media, so on Facebook and Instagram and that sort of stuff, and that's quite positive. And then we again train in the field an awful lot of farmers. We bring them onto our own farms just to see what's going on. This is one of our field officers showing them what's actually happening under the ground. And then this is our trials team and Center of Excellence. So these are the ones actually in the field trying to teach farmers to farm the same way that we do. And we, as I said, bring them onto our own farms and discuss with them how what we're doing and what they can take away from that. Sorry, that was a bit short and sharp, but I don't know if there's any questions. And I've got some websites there at the bottom on the left-hand side of my email address if anyone has any other questions. We don't answer them now.
I'll start off on this one because I haven't taken the lead so far. Giles, just on how you get knowledge across to smallholder farmers, I want to just share two examples with you. One was a Ugandan student who was looking in her dissertation on SAFs at the power of media in communicating with farmers. And I managed to get her the chance to go up and watch the recording of an episode of The Archers, the radio that's been going for years. And she went back and they looked at the way in which they could use radio in Uganda. Well, what they did is they created a bit of a short story to go regularly out about farming community, with a story about the behaviours of the family and what the daughter's doing and all the rest of it. But it had got seasonally adjusted guides into it as well. So that's one media it's worth looking at. The second one was a project in Vietnam where they were growing baby corn for canning for a company, and the company was trying to get across about quality and what they need to do in the field to get quality. They could do quality at the factory because they just had images of what they would accept and not accept in terms of baby corn going into cans. But in terms of how to grow it, they found that a lot of these farmers really enjoyed reading comic books. So they actually then put some stories into comic books, but within that, they'd also got the husbandry built into the comic book story. So I think, don't give up on how you engage with farmers. Find out what they enjoy doing and see if you can link with it.
Yeah, no, thank you. We've done a lot of stuff on local radio stations. We've done a lot of stuff with the BBC and with other local TV channels and Syngenta Foundation on this. So we as I said, we've made little cartoons and things like that. It's an interesting journey to find something that will work.
Yeah, it's about having the social story that hooks them, and then the technique comes through. Okay, any questions from?
There was an equivalent a team that I think is involved with the archers in this country, introduced a sort of archers type program in Kenya. I can't remember the name of it, but they also came down to Tanzania where they introduced a program called Pilika Pilika.
Yeah.
And I wrote the livestock side of the story for it. I
There
don't
you
know
go.
if that's still going. They had quite a strong listenership, I understood, in Kenya.
Yeah, I think that just shows there are opportunities in terms of how you engage with people. Any other questions, John?
Just on this point, really, farmer listening groups are very popular in East Africa, where you're engaging with these farmers, you want them to meet each other. And if you have something sent out from the organization, which is a regular radio program, with or without a storyline, and encourage them to listen to it together and then discuss it. That seems to work.
Yeah, that's good.
Sure. Okay. Interesting.
Okay, any other observations or questions for Giles?
Fantastic, Giles.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I think the way in which you're sort of looking at going down into the smaller scale, I guess you're looking at smaller and medium-sized commercial farmers. It's how you
Yeah,
messages to the very smallest of smallholders. But I guess that's where
it's
organisations who are leading conservation agriculture, along with the dibber and the hoe, are taking the lead in those areas.
it's interesting that we really are looking after farmers that are mechanized. We it's the same amount of work for us to look after a guy with 100 acres has got the one that's got half an acre. So we're really focusing on the largest side. Now, what we also notice is there's a huge amount of money and focus on the very, very small scale farmers. There's very few people looking after the 20 acre to 100 acre to 500 acre sort of size farmers. They've been left in the cold. And those are the ones that we're really trying to focus on because we think we can make a much bigger difference in terms of food security with those guys rather than the small scale farmers. Which is an interesting one, and that's sort of the way we've taken it.
It's also when I was doing a separate sort of field study, and it was looking at maize growing, and it was down in South Africa. And sorry, not South Africa. Yes, it was South Africa. And what was happening there? This one maize company had got some EU money to upscale their storage and processing, but they had to demonstrate extension out to smallholders. And they set quite a unique model where they got clusters of farmers to work as like a mini cooperative, but not in the form of a formal cooperative, but their extension or their technical officers would go out to see them timely to advise them that, and they'd give the advice to the group as if they were one person. And then the farmer groups had to then basically make sure each other did what they had to do. And they built into it because they were having some of the inputs from the maize processing company, and then so they were getting inputs from there in return for crop going into the processed. They gave them the license to be able to, if someone wasn't doing the job, the others could take over their land to complete it, to meet the contract, then that person in subsequent years would be excluded from the group.
Right.
What I found interesting was the extension officers were all going out with motorbikes, and the blokes had big motorbikes and the women had small motorbikes. So I think there's a bit of a gender issue there. But it did work very well. And what they then did is they identified within those groups of farmers, often about 15 farmers growing together in a region, they identified the brightest one and then invested them to be a lead farmer and gave them the farm business management to help the others around it. So I think maybe if you do find yourself going towards smaller groups, then clustering those farmers in some way may help you.
Yeah, we do focus on lead farmers in each region because especially here, which is the same around the world, is everyone's a fence line farmer. They're all looking over the fence, seeing what the neighbors are doing. And if you can really focus on the key farmers in each region and focus on them, then they can pass on the knowledge.
Exactly. The farmer to farmer over the fence is important. John.
Yeah, I think, Giles, you're absolutely right to focus on those medium scale farmers. We talk about the forgotten middle. The really needy poor ones are getting all sorts of charities working with them, and the really large ones probably don't need it. They're already entrepreneurial and organized enough. But you mentioned the difficulty of financial credit. And I wondered what your experience has been of table banking, which in other parts of Kenya has worked well.
Sorry, I missed that. Of what?
Table banking, where they take responsibility for their own mutual saving to be able to purchase seeds, etc.
In like a SACCO sort of scheme?
Yes, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like the Stockfells in South Africa.
Sure. No, we haven't really engaged with them. We've been engaging mostly with Rabobank and with Equity, which is a large regional bank.
Yeah.
And we just feel that banks really don't understand finance for agriculture anywhere in the world, really, and it's a difficult one. If we can't get it to work, really for us at our scale on our commercial farms, how do we put it down to the small scale farmers? It's hellishly expensive for them on a 6-month loan to be paying the equivalent of 20%.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to do with 4G Capital in Kenya?
With who, sorry?
4G Capital?
4G? No, I've a Fortis, but not 4G.
4G Capital, I was just wondering if you come across it. No, okay.
No.
I think that the observation here that resonates is that, as John said, there's the forgotten middle, which the people you're with, and the comment that those really small, super small farmers, the real smallholders on less than a hectare or whatever, they're getting lots of support. My counter argument to that, John, would be: is it the right support for those? Because I often find that the support for those farmers is not entrepreneurial. And it needs to be
No.
to allow them to grow. Yeah.
I mean,
Commercial.
Yeah.
I mean, two things. One is an NGO is commonly known as nothing going on.
Yes.
And really, our CSR is, we don't see it as charity.
Yeah.
It's a commercial, it's commercial between the two entities, and that's the way we look at it, and the way we see it as being viable.
Good. Okay, I think we covered most